During the 17th and 18th centuries, tensions between England and France grew, leading to a number of wars. These European conflicts were often echoed in the colonies, particularly in the northern colonies, which were closest to New France. As British colonists pushed further and further west in search of good land, they inevitably bumped up against the French, who claimed a huge swath of territory from Quebec to New Orleans. Although the French population in North America was comparatively small, they did have the advantage of alliances with many native tribes, who were often willing to aid them in their clashes with the British. In 1754, the London Board of Trade called a meeting in Albany, New York, asking all of the colonies to send representatives to discuss plans for their common defense against the French and their native allies. Benjamin Franklin, representing Pennsylvania, presented the Albany Plan of Union, a proposal to create a centralized colonial government that would handle issues regarding defense, westward expansion, and relations with the native tribes. The colonial assemblies promptly rejected it, too jealous of their individual power to share it with a central institution. That same year, the governor of Virginia sent a 22-year-old militia colonel named George Washington to eject the French from Fort Duquesne, a fortification they had established in a region claimed by the British. Washington never reached his objective, but instead confronted and defeated a French scouting party. Realizing that he was seriously outnumbered, Washington retreated to a hastily constructed fort, nicknamed Fort Necessity, where his forces were besieged and quickly forced to surrender. This brief clash helped set off the French and Indian War. The next 2 years witnessed constant native raids against the British frontier settlements, and a number of French victories, including the humiliating defeat of a force of British regulars under General Edward Braddock, who had been sent to once again attack Fort Duquesne. George Washington, having himself been defeated the previous year, redeemed his reputation with his heroic efforts to rally the British troops when General Braddock was mortally wounded. One of the key problems was the colonial inability to cooperate. The separate assemblies stalled and sidestepped raising troops and levying taxes to pay for the war. In 1756, a British commander-in-chief was appointed and given military authority over the colonial governors to unite the colonies in their own defense. But the colonial assemblies, which held the purse strings, complied only sporadically with his requests for men and supplies. By 1756, the war had also spread to Europe. The British Prime Minister, William Pitt, decided to adopt an aggressive course to achieve British domination, not only in North America, but throughout the world. He paid Frederick, King of Prussia, to fight British battles in Europe, to free up his armies to fight in North America and India. To persuade the colonists to be more cooperative, he promised to pay for the cost of raising troops. This larger struggle became known as the 7 Years' War. Pitt's aggressive plan paid off. By 1760, British forces, including many colonial troops, had seized key French settlements in North America, including Quebec and Montreal. Elsewhere in the world, the French witnessed similar defeats, leading them to sue for peace. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763, ended the war, with France losing all of its possessions in continental North America. It handed over a portion of this land, Louisiana Territory, to Spain, but the British retained the province of Quebec and the Ohio Country. How had the war affected the colonies? Many colonists did fight, and many died. Indeed, up until about 1759, colonial militias had done most of the fighting. New England, closest to French Canada, was hit particularly hard by the war. There was also a decided economic impact. The British pumped money into the colonies as they bought supplies for the army, sparking an economic boom. In part because of this prosperity, colonists began to import more and more English goods. After the war, however, the colonial economy slumped, and many colonists found themselves deeply in debt to British merchants, unable to pay for the manufactured goods they had become accustomed to having. Their exposure to the British Army also left many colonists with a sour taste in their mouths. Prior to this period, the British military presence in the colonies had been very small, but this changed with the war. What the colonists witnessed firsthand was the British class system in operation. The British officers, drawn largely from the ranks of the aristocracy, were typically contemptuous of the colonists, seeing them as inept amateurs who had been losing the war until the British regular troops stepped in. Within the regular army, of course, there was a huge social gulf between the rank-and-file soldiers, who usually came from the most impoverished elements of British society, and the haughty, aristocratic officers. This contrasted sharply with the more egalitarian practices found in the American military. For Native Americans, the war proved to be a disaster. Prior to the war, Native tribes had been able to play the two European powers off against each other. In other words, they used the threat of defecting to the opposing power as leverage to gain concessions. With only the British now being a presence in eastern North America, they lost this leverage. Native alarm at this shift in the balance of power led to the creation of a coalition of native tribes in the Northwest under the leadership of Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa. In 1763, this coalition launched a coordinated attack upon the British forts in the Ohio country, seeking to expel the British from this region. Their attack came close to succeeding. In the wake of Pontiac's rebellion, the British decided to try to limit conflicts with the natives by preventing colonists from settling west of the Appalachians. While most colonists ignored this order, the proclamation of 1763 undoubtedly frustrated those on the frontier, who hoped that the British would actively aid them in spreading their settlements to the west. It indicated that the British government was more interested in keeping their costs low by avoiding active warfare than in serving the interests of the colonists. Although clearly reluctant to take aggressive action against native tribes, the British nonetheless did decide to station an army in the colonies. This was really the first time that the government had kept a large military force in the region during a time of peace. Prior to the 1760s, the colonists had generally fended for themselves, using local militias to defend themselves against native raids. Many Americans asked themselves why the government had decided to keep this large force of professional soldiers in the colonies. The British argued that this was necessary to defend the frontier against native tribes and to keep an eye on the French population in Canada. But many colonists suspected that the real reason was to intimidate the British colonists and prevent them from rebelling. Keeping an army in the colonies was also extremely expensive for the government, particularly given the huge debt which they had accumulated fighting the 7 Years' War. Parliament already heavily taxed the British public, so government officials reasoned that under these circumstances, the colonists should help pay for their own defense, that they should pay for the troops stationed in North America. This seemed quite reasonable to them, since the Americans paid very low taxes, about 1/25 the amount paid by an average Englishman.